About
Good evening. Welcome to our regularly scheduled ad hoc attendance boundaries meeting. Yes, I'm joined tonight, or this, what is it? Evening, tonight, this afternoon. I'm joined this afternoon by two of my colleagues and some wonderful community members. Let's start to my right and introduce board members, and then we'll go to
Carolyn Jones, board member.
Dr. Martha.
Steve Bolton, board member.
Jeremy Gollihue, Chief Information Officer for the district.
Carol Gibbs from Taft Elementary and Mount Auburn Community Council.
Good. We gotta move down. Okay. So you get the microphone.
They told us to move this way.
Oh, I know.
Okay, my name is Adela Thompson. I'm from Silverton, LSDMC chair. And it's been a while since I've been here, so I'm trying to.
Great to be back here.
Can you push that over to her?
Okay, you have to share this now.
Okay.
Annie Coates, PRM parent, Clark parent, LSDMC at PRM.
All right. Well, welcome. Oh, wait, no. Hello, Treasurer Wagner.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, how are you?
Fabulous.
And then we have our board admin, and then I'm going to have Rob introduce himself and then share for any instructions of people that are joining us online. So, Ms. Phyllis.
Administrative assistant.
Rob Wilson, technician. If you'd like to speak during the Speaking in Public, please click the hand icon at the bottom corner of your screen. We will ask for your name and school association, and then we will invite you to come into the Speaking of the Public section at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Right. So I was able to share with people in the room prior to that we've got a couple of action items. If you're able to get access to our agenda online, we've got a couple of things from July that were action items, and then a couple of questions from admin to our historian board members that needed clarification. And then we will have, I think, what we need to work on our summation, and then any new business from the board members that they'd like to discuss. Do you all have anything before we dive into the meeting?
No.
We're gonna mark this day that they have nothing to say. Okay, so let's dive into it. Jeremy is our staff here, and he is representing the admin team today. So let's start. The first thing on our agenda is analysis of capacity across corridors for space for middle schools. Treasurer Wagner, I don't know if you ever want to chime in as well, because she's representing our team online as well. That was an action item from July. Floor is yours.
Okay. So went back, looked at it, and a couple of different conversations we've had around capacity in the corridors and the middle school idea over several different meetings, right? One of the last conversations we had were specifically to looking at Taft Elementary and Vine, the location of Vine, to see. And we took a look at those, and there's really opportunities for either. But what we did really was go back and take a bigger look at the corridors as a whole and look at the capacity that's available within the corridor from across all the buildings, and then what the actual, sorry, if we have a joiner. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Is it okay if I just sit in? I'm from the Walnut Hills School newspaper.
Sure.
And I ran an article about the budget finalization.
Okay, this is our ad hoc meeting, but
Yeah.
okay,
It's
come on in.
yeah.
Would you like to introduce yourself? Just go to the mic. Jeremy, we're gonna pause you for
Yep.
1 second. Just go to the mic and
Press is here,
introduce.
so we.
Gotta behave now.
And so, and just introduce yourself and where you're from.
My name is Daniel Berman. I'm from the Walnut Hills Chatterbox.
So we are actually on, there's an agenda right there. We're on number one, talking about the capacity across corridors for a middle school.
Mhm.
Mr. Gallagher.
Okay. So I said, we took a little bit bigger look, and we could go through and kind of pick out schools here or there and kind of work through each one if we wanted to, but I thought it would be beneficial to look at the whole corridor to see really what our capacity looks like versus the number of students that live within that corridor. So we're moving out the Montessori students, the international students, our qualified entrance schools, and looking at just the population of students there from a neighborhood perspective. And going across each of the three corridors, if you look at the eastern corridor first, there's pretty well a significant amount of capacity across our buildings, both in the elementary space from pre-K to 6, as well as the high school on the east side. So in total, there's roughly 1,000 elementary seats and 1,200 high school seats. Again, that's the whole corridor for all of the high schools and all of the elementaries combined. So with that kind of capacity available within that corridor, you could almost pick any of the schools with a target of how to rearrange some of the population attending each of the schools and programs to draw them to certain areas, and have the ability to make a middle school wherever you needed to in that area.
Can you repeat that for me? You said 1,000 elementary seats.
Roughly 1,000 elementary seats and 1,200 high school seats.
And what corridor were you?
East.
East, okay.
So the end of what you shared was that there is the possibility in the eastern corridor for a middle school option, or at least to talk about spacing for a middle school.
Yeah, there's definitely capacity amongst all of the buildings that you could repurpose, reallocate, and adjust some of the attendance to make room for a middle school.
Okay.
Or any other programmatic purpose.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just to reemphasize too, with that kind of capacity, it demonstrates, at least in the eastern corridor, why we've been doing what we've been doing. It might confuse why we purchased Bramble, understanding the capacity that we have in the eastern corridor. That's more about the future than anything. But also, it's not a matter of building a new middle school, but the whole concept has been to try to, how should I say it, use the inventory that we currently have, because we don't have the money necessarily to build all the buildings that we may need. So it's really about using our inventory, because right now, much as you've just demonstrated in this transition about magnets and neighborhood schools and high school, the K-8 piece versus the, our K-6 and then 7-12, readjusting all of that, it would appear that at least on the eastern side of town, we have the capacity without necessarily new construction necessarily. Okay.
Any other questions? Board Member Jones? Okay, I'm liking it.
All right, moving to the central corridor.
Okay.
The story is very similar. So in the central corridor, again, looking at it from the elementary perspective, there's roughly 1,500 seats in capacity available, again, spread across the corridor, and roughly 800 high school. And that actually is without using Woodward as a capacity provider. So that's really spread between Aiken, Hughes, and Taft, that there's roughly 800 available seats. Woodward, I pulled out of the analysis essentially because looking at Woodward, we put it into the central corridor. I think there's some interest in, CTE programs at Woodward. And so I think there's programmatic opportunities there that we don't necessarily have to have the Woodward capacity to meet the capacity in the central corridor to have opportunities for the middle school or other programmatic changes.
That's Aiken, Taft, and Withrow. What did you say?
Aiken, Taft, and Hughes.
And Withrow falls in the eastern corridor?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the central corridor high schools, when you're figuring this out on the east or in the central corridor, are you beginning to anticipate with the exception of the exclusion schools, the exclusionary schools, exclusive schools, however you want to talk about them, whether it be Walnut or SCPA, are you talking about looking at the high schools as we've talked about the future being 9 through 12? Or are you still looking at it being 7-12? Because I don't know that changes seats, but I do know like Aiken is very crowded at this point in time, unless something gets moved out of there, which I know you guys are already looking at regarding those 3 or 4 preschool classes to get them out of that one wing. So there's more. So I didn't know if you were, when you're thinking about it. And the second thing, if I could, is that central corridor has more career-oriented definition and profile than the east or the west does, because as you even go from Taft and SCPA and you go then to Hughes and Aiken and up the corridor, there's a lot of career tech kinds of. There's still comprehensive high schools offering comprehensive programs, but they have a core group of tech stuff.
I also I think that given that, if in fact that's true, that one of the things that I believe we're going, and it's probably more of a question, that we're going to include in the report is some overview of program access and how we take and spread that out or make it accessible in all the other schools. So I hear what you're saying. It's like right now there may be, I want to say overabundance, but that might be the wrong word, and it's not an overabundance. But there may be more career tech options that may have to go to some of the other areas and other corridors. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay.
Or the benefit of, if they're going to have a concentration, it's best to have them in the central corridor versus only on either the east or the west from a point of access and transportation. But yeah.
So if I could too, just not to miss your question, that's a really good call out and point I should have clarified. So really when I'm speaking of elementary and high school, I probably shouldn't use that terminology. I'm really referring to pre-K through 8th grade and 9th grade through 12th grade.
Okay.
So when I said elementary capacity, I meant really looking at preschool grade through 8th grade. So I appreciate that. I should have pointed that out. Yeah, I do have the numbers actually. If we wanted to look at pre-K through 6, and then 7 through 12 as a separate grade bands.
Oh,
I
I
would
don't
have
think
that
so.
as well. But
I think we've started to move beyond that one.
I was listening to you, but I want to make sure I got it. You said elementary capacity or elementary seats is pre-K through 8th grade, and then high school seats are what?
9 through 12.
Okay.
That's good.
There was a question. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if Montessori was included in your totals for Clark, or was that in one of the exclusionary?
It is not. So at this point, this is with the Montessori, all the elementary and high school Montessori programs removed from both the population and the capacity. So that we can look at it more as a separate system.
I like that too.
So I think we need to say that one more time for the one time. Can you repeat that one more time, please?
So the numbers and figures that we're talking about for capacity and populations, that is without the Montessori schools, both elementary and high school, as well as our international program schools, so AMI, AWL, Fairview, and LEAP, and as well as our conditional entrance schools, SCPA and Walnut. It does, however, include the current non-classified, and this is my term, so if we have a better one, but the non-classified magnets. So that would be the College Hill.
Center of the universe.
Yes.
I concur.
We got to use this caucus, the College Hill caucus, while we can. We got a few more months.
Okay. All right.
Pictures there.
Board members, any other questions? So we must go on over to the west
Here's the
side.
problem.
The west side is the best side, so they
So
say.
the West Corridor presents a problem.
Big.
In terms of the capacity for the buildings there, as well as the overall enrollment population for elementary. Gotta stop saying it. So from the preschool to 8th grade capacity, we are at a negative 50. So we are short 50 seats today from what we would need. And for the 9 through 12, we're approximately 260 seats short.
0.
Wow. That was a bummer. Yes, ma'am.
One thing I would explain there is that by pulling out the Montessori schools on the west side, because that's where we've had our growth, is on the west side, whether it's Mother Mercy Gamble purchase, that's that high school, we added those seats, and then that freed up additional primary Montessori in the Little People's Gamble. So, I mean, that's part of it, but that's where we invested our efforts because that's where the growth was. But continually, the capacity at many of the West Side schools have been loaded more than any place else in the district for a number of years. It dates way back to through even before the Ronan period. And people have known that boundary lines are going to have to be redrawn in some way on the West Side, and you don't have the availability of inventory or building on the West Side like you do on the Central and the East Side based upon those capacity numbers. I love it when the numbers kind of prove out the kind of common sense or common knowledge. I think that's interesting.
Board Jones?
So,
Just one little data point real quick for context. I found this particularly useful. So when we talk about removing the Montessoris and those other systems from the population capacity, basically the evaluation we're talking about now represents around 23,000 of our students. So basically take the 35, the 36 minus the 25 or the 23 represents what is involved in all the other schools outside of this.
yes, ma'am.
What schools are slated to be closed? Any
No,
Zero.
no, ma'am. No, we've not talked about that.
Okay. You know, you just hear stuff and I'm trying to clarify because I haven't been here for a while and trying to figure out if any of them are being slated, if not slated, with everything that's going on, eventually closing without you all really planning to do it. Okay, do we
That's a
still?
loaded statement.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
I know it's loaded. I know it's loaded. I was trying to, yeah,
Fair question.
yeah, but
Unintended consequence.
yeah. So I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question.
I think you just did.
I was gonna say, you asked the.
Okay.
So one thing that I think, one thing I'm hearing from you, she's got that grandma look, so it's kind of like, get it to. Are you asking what schools are under enrolled with the potential
Yes,
of
thank you.
maybe having some unintended consequences due to their low enrollment?
Yeah. Thank you. Did y'all hear that?
Mhm. So it's a brilliant question.
Thank you. Thank you. Because the conversation is there, and I'm just trying to figure out where it's coming from, and what I can do.
Can I
Yes,
respond to
ma'am.
that? Yeah, I think that's a fair question, but I also think that, when our community hears about the work that ad hoc is doing, that's when the rumors start to circulate. I think, though, the reality of it is we're here because we're trying to reimagine what our district looks like. So, for the example of looking at schools that are under enrolled, we don't have any plans to close school. But there may be combining schools or different focuses, changing program access. Because once we make these changes, it's not one or two or three schools that might look different. It could be the full gamut of 65 schools that look differently. So I would say, I hope I'm answering your question. There's been no discussion about us like straight out closing schools, although I think that has to be a part of the conversation in the context of what happens when we do all these shifts. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're closing them. They may look different. Is there a possibility down the road that schools may be closed? I mean, I would hate to speculate about that. I think we need every building that we have. So.
Thank you. At Silverton right now, we were slated to lose 3 teachers because of the rumors and stuff that's going on, but we only lost 2. And everything gets blamed on getting rid of us.
That is absolutely not true, though.
So,
You
but
lost
yeah.
3 teachers recently.
Mhm.
That's probably because of TAC.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's not
That's
because
a
we're
whole
trying to get
different
rid of.
process. It doesn't have anything to do with the building.
Okay.
What we're doing.
I'm gonna let Board Member Bolton go. I just think that there's so many rumors going around and there's so much misinformation going around. We authentically, we're not trying to close Silverton like that. I know that's a concern, but every school in the district has to have their numbers looked at for teacher allocation. And I was just at a school yesterday and they were frustrated because they lost a teacher. They lost 2 teachers. So it's going around, but it's not about closing the schools. There's a bunch of different conversations going around. We're trying to, actually, I think that's how the middle school option came up, is because we were trying to relieve some of the pressure off of the high schools and utilize our buildings, to Board Member Bolton's point of not wanting to. We don't have the money to build buildings, but we do have buildings that are under enrolled, and we could potentially be more efficient with how we are using things. I'm going to let Board Member Bolton respond, and then we'll go to you, Karen.
What I would add to the Silverton thing is what we've said all along, which, and I understand the lack of trust and the concern, perfectly justifiable. I mean, it really is. One of the things we have to do in the big picture certainly is to make sure there isn't this perception that our magnets are this and our neighborhood schools are this.
That's right.
This is something we've cared about for, I mean, as long as Carolyn's been on the board and I've been on the board, this is that gap, that perceived gap. And I think we've made some strides in that. But from a financial standpoint and a transportation standpoint, one of the parts of the big picture too is getting rid of magnets, not necessarily schools. We need Silverton, and we want Silverton to thrive and survive, and it's going to be part of whatever that future is as to how lines get drawn. So I think that was the concern from the Silverton folks, as I understood it, was losing their magnet status, that then they would have fewer kids enrolled, but actually they had too few kids enrolled as a magnet, very frankly. And so, and that's partly COVID, it's all these other, conditions and what have you. And maybe programmatically it didn't sell as well as it needed to, considering what a great school it is. So I think there's those themes. There's those themes that we are reducing the magnets. And then also the way Jeremy's talking about it is we're starting to also talk about, choices. We have systems within the system. We have a Montessori system. We have an extensive preschool system. We have an extensive international system. So we have to start to see our schools in categories as systems, not just 65 different schools, but we have systems within systems, and that has to become part of our messaging. But we're very devoted to Silverton as a neighborhood school.
Can you speak on the busing? I think the busing has affected our students' way of getting there, because most of our students are bused in, and we're having all kind of problems with the busing not being sufficient, as far as I know.
We're going to talk about transportation. We'll put that on the parking lot and talk about that when we get to number 2. I want Jeremy to get through this. And the reason why I'm being a little bit more insistent is because we need to get this information for our report. So we need to get this stuff done. Yes, ma'am. Oh, Lord, she got that grandma energy going on, y'all. Also, Carolyn, you wanted to say something.
Are there more than, is there more than one building on the Mercy campus?
No.
On the Mercy campus.
There's more than one building, not more than one school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
There are
Mercy campus?
multiple buildings on there
you said Mercy campus?
Yeah,
in the west side.
Mother Mercy campus.
More than
Oh,
one
you're talking
building.
about Gamble?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
okay, because when you say Mercy, I'm thinking what's over in College Hill.
Oh, I see.
Always.
We can buy that building.
I was just thinking that maybe you could move I thought there was a second building. I lived down the street from there for 20 years. And if there was, maybe moving the elementary Gamble into that building and let the other one be up junior high or high middle school.
That's sort of what we did when the Gamble, when we bought Mercy and it became Gamble High School. The high school had been in the junior high Gamble, and so that building then became freed up to have the elementary Montessori. But there's no middle school concept necessarily evolving from the Montessori concept. It's more that we're, thinking in terms of our neighborhood schools.
But I was thinking if you move the Gamble children into that a second building onto that campus, then you'd free up the old Gamble building for a middle school or junior high, whatever you're going to call them.
Yeah, there's not that.
I don't think
There's not
there's
a
much
size
space as it.
Or
There's not a school.
right.
There's houses.
Right.
You remember. Yeah.
And I believe those would have to be revamped. Wasn't there something about we can't use them yet?
Don't be cold. Or
Something about
like
it.
that.
We don't have money for that part. So just of everything that we have, we're trying to be efficient. Jeremy, is that it?
So yeah, I think that rounds out in terms of the analysis for the capacity across all 3. I mean, in short, East and Central definitely has some options and flexibility available with what we have. West, again, stands as our challenge.
To Ms. Gibbs' point, is there the possibility, since this data excluded Montessori's, is there the possibility to combine some Montessori's to free up a building? I think that's what your question is asking. So that we could use it for a middle school option there.
So in short, not really. The Montessori schools on the west side are all at capacity or very close to or over.
Okay.
In fairness, all of our Montessori schools are at or over capacity. I believe Gamble Montessori High School probably has the largest capacity available, but that still wouldn't be enough to actually put another Montessori school in. You know, it would be a couple hundred at best.
Even if you move the after preschool, it's still in the building.
Preschool kids are in what used to be the
Elementary.
And then the Montessori concept is different. So we can't just take one grade of them out too. We have to do 3, which would make it a little higher. Okay. Any questions online? We are cooking with grease, as the old people say. So,
You just old.
I got an old spirit, I tell you. Number 2, oh wait, Treasurer Wagner, did you have anything to add to that around our staff having licensures? I don't know if that, did you have anything to add?
about middle schools.
For the middle?
I did some analysis on some of the buildings that you had asked about, like Bramble, Parker, and Schroeder as a conglomerate. And I looked at South Avondale and Rockdale. You can certainly merge South Avondale and Rockdale into one building and free up that building to do a middle school, the other building. Together, it wouldn't meet the capacity of the one building. They're both 650 buildings. On the east side of town, if you do the Bramble is a pre-K 3, Parker is the 4-8, and Schroeder is the 7-8. I'm sorry, 9-12. You certainly free up capacity, but then they'll be under-enrolled if you remove the 7th and 8th grades. You'll get some savings in a couple teachers when you consolidate the grade bands like that. I'd have to go through and do like a complete budget development to figure out what other positions, like how does that impact Pam and the 8 assistant principals, secretaries, and all that kind of stuff. But I just looked at classroom teachers. And so it's doable. We have to kind of define, and I understand that each quarter may not have the same breakdowns. For example, the east side might be PK3, 4, 8, 9, 12. Central might look something different. So we have to, in order for me to continue to be more effective and productive with this analysis, I kind of need to know what those conglomerate, what are the pairings and what the grade levels for each pairing would be. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am, it does to me. Board Member Bolton, Board Member Jones.
Makes sense.
Board Member Bolton, I can see it in your eye.
Yes, it does make sense, what's suggested, and I'm stunned that Rockdale and South Avondale are 650s.
It's a rated capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they could do or what they were designed to do. That does that, because I kind of envision one of them being the lower grades and the other one being the upper grades of, divided K3 or early childhood or whatever. But you could put, if that's the capacity, and both of those are lovely buildings, yeah, you could really concentrate preschool, Head Start, all kinds of things within those buildings, it would seem, and then you could use one for that 5 through 8 or whatever, just rather than merge the two schools, which is what I just heard you say, Jen, merging the two schools into one and then using one as a middle school. It'd be great if we had that capacity on the west side, but you may not need that capacity on the east side. I hadn't even thought about them being 650s.
I think it would be wise to keep that as sort of a conceptual model. And for the purpose of this, because the analysis, I think whatever configuration we do, we're going to ask Jen to do an analysis of it, right? To help us kind of figure out. I think just to say that the potential is there to have What we're looking for is the big picture thought about it, which is we want to get a middle school in there somewhere. So I mean, I think it's all good conversation, but I just want to make sure that we included in the report that these are some of the conceptual models, and we have to work out the financial analysis piece and whether or not it makes sense for us to do that at a different point. That's just me.
So what I'm hearing you say though, Jen, there would be a cost savings.
Yeah.
In the central corridor with those two schools. We could just have to figure out maybe the option, but there would be a savings. Is that right?
So when I only looked at classroom teachers, I didn't look at total building, and I will do that going forward, like if that's the direction we want to go in. But you might lose some teachers, but you might have to pick up some paras because or you might lose some efficiency on the clerical people or school social workers or counselors. We'd have to look at the whole population. I did look to see if you wanted to do the pre-K 3, 4, 8, 9, 12. I looked at Withrow. It would certainly help Withrow's overcapacity. Woodward's under capacity, so you wouldn't want to pair it with Woodward necessarily, unless you wanted to do different programming at Woodward. It really kind of depends on what you want each high school to be, and then you work backwards.
Gotcha. Yes. Question?
No, I couldn't.
Okay. So, and this is not, just to kind of segue, this is not inclusive of transportation, right? This is just the staffing piece.
Yeah, I don't have access to the transportation stuff, but I would caution, and what might be wise, and Jeremy and I could work on this together probably, is on the west side of town, is looking at it where the kids are enrolled versus where they live. Because I know that in years past, there was a grouping of schools that traded each other's children. I remember when Reese Price was like way over capacity. And it's because they had half of somebody else's kids, but the other half of their kids went to that school. So there were shifting kids back and forth. It didn't really help the matter. But if you look at residential data, the way it is now on the west side, there might be some, if you send everybody back to their neighborhood school, so to speak, except for the magnets, and then reanalyze the data to see if that helps. I don't know. Jeremy, have you had an opportunity to look at that?
Yeah, actually, we are of the same mind, and that is the very basis for the analysis that we've been looking at. Is definitely looking at the population and where they live versus where they attend. Mm-hmm. So yes, we're very much in tone.
That's great minds think alike.
Yep.
He's one of my best hires ever.
And we definitely need to catch up on some of this too to work through the next pieces because the staffing is definitely a challenge.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, and we've known for at least 7 years that the attendance boundaries on the west side needed to be redrawn. We've known that. I mean, that's the last couple of years that Mrs. Ronan was here. Some of us begged, while you're here and you have nothing to lose, because redrawing lines are a difficult can of worms to open. So that is that what you're talking about in part, residence and attendance boundaries?
In part, I think it's helpful. To Jen's point, is you almost have to pull back and look at the very baseline. Mm-hmm. So it's almost, you can take it from the perspective of disregard the attendance boundaries to some extent as to where they exist today.
Right. Oh,
and
please
look
do.
at just where the kids live. Like we define it by attendance boundaries. So, Bond Hill as a school, there's also the Bond Hill attendance boundary, which encompasses several neighborhoods, well, primarily Bond Hill and some smaller pieces of neighborhoods. So when you talk about it from an attendance boundary or where they live, you're looking at the students who live within there, not necessarily the students who attend Bond Hill, which we've looked at in pieces. But so you may have, 200 kids who live there who attend 5 different schools. Mm-hmm. So it's important when you're looking at what capacity we have versus where the kids actually live. Mm-hmm. So on any of the corridors, and that's largely what we talked about, was like in the corridor, you can see like this is the number of kids who live there. This is the amount of capacity that those buildings have, independent of necessarily where they're exactly located.
And that goes back to your original issue regarding and this goes back even farther, the Winton Hills neighborhood versus College Hill versus Mount Airy. And you then showed us that the kind of transportation savings that could be there if people actually attended, because from the very first meeting we had, when we had the history described to us, the history showed that we had been drawing boundaries that we couldn't really be allowed to draw right now, because we were concentrating on kind of mixing and whatever, diversifying and combining. And the reality is, as we look at new attendance boundaries, not just in the West, but elsewhere, as we must obviously on the East side, we have different stipulations that can impact for sure. And those little grades are the grades, that's where the transportation budget is.
Yeah.
Transportation budget is not in Metro or getting our 9, although it's part of it, the 9 through 12 kids to school.
It's in the little.
It's the little people that are costing such a fortune, and we want them to be safe, but we also, it's not necessarily safe to transport them such great distances and what have you.
I do see you, Carol. Hold on one second. So I'm wondering, based on what you said, is it better for us to just start from like a blank slate rather than to try to ask our questions based on what we have and where we want to go? If we were to reimagine it and say, hey, Jeremy, look at where the kids live versus in their schools versus where they're attending, is it better to start there and then overlap that with what we currently have? Does that make sense?
It does, and I would say there's certainly value in it. There's a lot of caveats to it, and you have to be very diligent in looking at it, because it does show some things necessarily that we would have poor reaction to, right?
Okay.
So,
okay.
But I do believe that there's definite value in starting there.
Okay.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you can do the foundation all at one time. You couldn't move grades or anything all at once. You have to phase it in, but it gives you a place to start, build to the finish, and then figure out how you step your way back to that.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Right. Our numbers were higher in the past, I know, but I think even today, Taft Elementary is 30 to 40% of our children come from Price Hill. So when you're looking at overextension and the west side, you're going to have even more if you start neighborhood schooling.
That's a far distance.
Yes, it is.
And we're busting them because that's
Yeah, correct.
that's pre-K through.
Well, when that happened, when we made the changes, I can't remember the full context of it, but it was specific to Taft. And it was opened up somehow to include those kids coming from Price Hill. And because Taft Elementary is kind of in the geographic area with Taft, it was opened up to pull those kids. That was a conversation that happened a long time ago. And I cannot remember how that conversation was started.
To get the Price Hill students.
To get the Price Hill students, yes.
To get them out of the west side so
Yes.
open up spaces.
Yes.
So we're STEM supposedly, and
Okay.
that's basically what the Price Hill kids are there for.
Okay.
STEM.
Okay, so okay.
Wow. Yes, ma'am.
That's when the program piece, if they're coming for STEM, on the east side, on the west side, we do not have a STEM program. So that's where you have to, with the corridors, that has to be the capacity and what have you, but it has to be whatever programs are in one corridor, it should be, if possible, in 3 corridors. We can't afford 4 quadrants. We can't do 4 programs of everything. But that's also why you want to divide the schools into systems. Just like with Montessori, we have to have the same amount of Montessori, which is why we've got to have that central location for a Montessori. But as we do try to re-envision this, I'm going to say it again. In this town, as you re-envision it, you have to kind of do what we did with Cans, is you start with a base neighborhood that may carry the name, and then you moving out to where people live that are contiguous to that base neighborhood starts to make sense. So like you said, there's I always say there's 5 neighborhoods or something in Kansas, and you've said there's like 11. But you start with a base, just like with Silverton. You start with Silverton, you maintain the integrity of Silverton's boundary lines as an entity, not just as an attendance boundary. But that you they make that neighborhood an anchor.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to comment, you have to forgive me because my mind doesn't work as detailed as Ms. Bolton's, and I hear her, and she's very good at seeing all of that together. For me, it's a little more challenging, and I hear what we're saying, and we have all these concepts, but it might be helpful. I don't want to create tons of more work because we don't have that kind of time, but I think if we're trying to develop a report that we need to give to the full board to understand it, it might almost be helpful to put sort of the major concepts and examples of what we're talking about, and then lay it out, like, where are we lacking systemically with program access? I mean, what programs, because we want it to be all across all spectrums of these corridors. So which corridor has STEM and this and that, and what are the numbers of kids, and what, you know, that to me seems like, I don't know how hard that would be, but that would help me better understand, because I sometimes struggle with trying to understand the big picture with this. And
How do you need to see it?
Well, just some way of what we're talking about here. I hear us talking about looking at capacity versus where kids live.
That's a theme.
And yeah, that theme, but then what's in that corridor that's drawing them? For example, Carol said, well, TAP, we have STEM. Okay, well, is STEM as a program, curriculum and instruction, is that offered in all of the corridors? If it's not, then you certainly want to build that access in there. So I'm looking at something that's a little more
Large, yeah.
Yeah.
Less detail and bigger.
Less big
thematic
picture,
ideas.
yes.
Yeah, big picture.
Yeah. I don't know. That's just
No, you're not off. I was kind of thinking about that too, because that's why I asked the question. Should we just start from the beginning? I like your idea. This is where we are, and I feel as if we're moving chess pieces to fit into something instead of looking at where we want where we kind of want to go, and then seeing how we could get there versus how we. Does this make sense? Okay, I'm saying it, and I'm thinking, like, it makes so much sense to me to look at. We need to revamp our neighborhood school model. That's what we're all dancing around that topic. But the elephant in the room is we've taken out the magnets. All we're left is
We're not
neighborhood.
ending magnets.
We are not
We are reducing
ending
magnets.
magnets.
Say that loudly.
I promise you. In this discussion, the magnet schools, the internationals, and all of those. And we are left with neighborhood schools and the magnets that aren't traditional magnets. What did you call it?
Non-classified.
Non-classified magnets. So if we boil that down, what are we really looking at, and what do we need it to look like? And I like your idea. It's just the neighborhood system. But to me, when we keep calling it something different and we're dancing around the topic, it's confusing to me, because at the end of the day, I think it makes sense to look at, if we were to look at where the kids live and the school that's next to them or within the 1 mile, let's look and see what those numbers look like, because that will dramatically change our transportation. That will dramatically impact us. And then see where, if we were to overlay that with the reality of kids are coming, they are traveling. So what is the difference? Okay, to say, well, if they were to go to their neighborhood school, I'll use myself as an example. We live in Avondale. We live right near South Avondale and Rockdale. We chose to go to Pleasant Hill. I didn't get any bus service, so that was my trade-off. But what is the real cost of me crossing that? And so if I were to go to my neighborhood school, it would be no transportation. But then, so I'm thinking of looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
So yes, ma'am.
That would be,
I do see.
that's the system that I think Eve is talking about, that I think would be helpful if we're talking about reimagine. We're reimagining systems of schools. And within each system structure, what's available, I mean, what's capacity, where are we lacking capacity, what does enrollment look like, what are the financial implications, what's the transportation need? It's like all of these systems have to have that. And because we want to be able to provide comprehensive educational access in all of the systems of schools, everywhere. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but I think I'm trying to focus more on the systems that Ms. Bolton is describing and trying to figure out how we explain what those systems, how those systems work or should work.
Well, in my example, I wasn't even talking about the systems. I was talking about just the neighborhood in the school. I haven't even
That's the
added.
system.
Well,
That is the
I guess
system.
it was a system.
Yeah.
I was thinking the systems are STEM focused. The systems are the focus of the school as to why people are
is.
going there, but that's not the neighborhood piece. Like they don't live near Taft, but they're going there for that particular system. That's different. If we were to take, let's say there's 30 kids and they live on the west side, they would be going to their neighborhood school. So now if they want to go to Taft, we need to put a system over there because that's where they're going there. That's how I'm looking at it.
I think we're saying,
Is it
that's
the
pretty
same?
much what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I'm talking 30 or 40%, not 30 or 40 kids.
Mm.
It's a large group. Of
Okay.
kids.
Mhm.
Okay. I got you. I think she had her hand up.
I think I felt like there was a little bit of confusion between what you guys were saying, but then Miss Jones, I think, was kind of getting where I was, and just that you want to offer this STEM in this corridor, in this corridor, in this corridor, but you aren't offering like this school offers that, this school offers that, and this school offers that. So that was it. I think that was just
An aha moment. Yes, ma'am.
I think if I can use your analogy about the chessboard or whatever,
Yes, ma'am.
the chessboard is the three corridors. That's the board. That's the big difference. And it makes sense financially, makes sense to choice, as you guys are pointing out, equitable choice. So that it doesn't depend where you live in this district, whether or not your child has the full range of choices that the child that lives on the other side of town has. And whether that choice is Montessori, that choice is international, or that choice is neighborhood, or whether it's this or that or whatever we have. You know, there will be some schools that are citywide, and we can figure out there'll be a handful of magnets that would be maybe citywide. But I don't know what, besides Fairview, I can't think of any right now. But that's it, making sure that there's equitable choice in each of those corridors. And the other financial thing, and Jen is the one that's mentioned this to me years ago, as did Kathy Ingram, and also Mary Ronan. You have to have a certain number of kids in a building to actually offer the full programming. If you have too few kids in a building, now we don't want too many kids in the building, you have to find that balance. But if you don't have, and maybe Jen can help explain that better than I'm trying to, but you have, in order to have full staffing of art and music and these other opportunities, extracurricular, if you have too few kids in a building, you cannot pay for it. Doesn't, what's
Return on
the,
investment.
yeah, there you go. You don't have the return on investment, and they don't have the opportunity, the equitable opportunity. That we can't staff something that's so small.
Right.
With all the things that children need to have, or teens need to have. Can we ask Jen what that means?
Yeah, Jen, do you have any input on that?
I do. So back in the day when we were doing the facility master plan, the minimum size building was a 450 in order to break even that way. And I'm sure it's probably 550 by now. So we'd have to recalculate it, but there was a minimum that the OSFC would allow us to do in the budget process that we used in terms of how many students did you need to have your full complement of PAM, get your counseling, your school social worker, and all that. So we'll have to recalculate it based on the staffing models that we have now to see what that would be. But I'd say it's at least 500.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Transportation.
So try and keep this one fairly short, and then really just for questions. But the overall estimated cost for transportation of high schools is roughly $10 million.
And that's the cheap stuff.
That is the cheap.
But that's 7th and 8th.
So to clarify that is approximately $3 million for Metro and roughly $7 million for Yellow Bus, which the Yellow Bus would be for the 7th and 8th graders at the high schools.
So we could save money.
Big time.
I think 7 million is a lot now,
It'd be nice to say 7 million.
It would be. We got some stuff to do.
Or even, yeah.
So your biggest, just to add a note, your biggest savings opportunity there certainly comes from how you can maximize and optimize the current Yellow Bus fleet that's moving students for K-6s now, as opposed to moving them with additional Yellow Buses. That's where you lose that cost, is because it requires a separate route and a separate bus to take them to the hospital.
But in theory, if they're neighborhood schools, then they don't need bus transportation because they would be walking. Yes, ma'am.
And the other piece of that, those Yellow Buses, as we found, as we know too, are special needs kids that are traveling via Yellow Buses. Like I mentioned, the 7 at Aiken at Dismissal, and there's 20, 30 kids. I mean, so yeah, we have to be very careful how we do that. But yeah, and I think this is instructional too. It's like you have feeders, let's say like the suburbs do. You also have more communication among them between the instructional people and the families, that they get used to that. There's a stabilizing impact to have it. I mean, I understand what we were doing all along and why everybody did what they did, but as you say, keep re-envisioning or reimagining, we can leave it. Let's do it.
I do think we still need to have the city at the table because our students we have a high transient population and they don't choose to move, but oftentimes their families do. So there are other conversations about this that I think other people need to be able to. Yes, ma'am.
Neighborhood school. Okay, the neighborhood school, is that a 1 mile radius?
The transportation
That's what I mean.
issue is 1 mile. Inside of 1 mile, we do not supply transportation, okay, for either our high school or our middle school or our little people. Outside of that 1 mile, you might have a neighborhood boundary or the attendance boundary, which would be larger than 1 mile. For example, you might have 1 mile at Silverton, but then Silverton itself might be larger. So you start with that 1 mile of transportation radius, and then you start kind of edging out. And that's why what Kareem is saying, as the chair is saying, that if you look then at the neighborhood piece, then you've got an anchor, which I would call an anchor, and expand it.
You actually are working with Councilmember Johnson on the neighborhood, what was it, the 1 mile?
1 mile.
Yeah.
1 mile.
Around the schools to make it a safe zone. Got that piece. All right. Jen, did you have anything to add about transportation? Okay. Jeremy Bramble, year 2, and plan for JPP middle school and teachers. That's a July action item. It's number 3 on our agenda.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did not anticipate that one being on the agenda for this week, so I would have to defer that one to the superintendent.
Gotcha.
But you kind of addressed it. I mean, from the standpoint of and the community input from Madisonville area, anyways, is this, as you all shared, Superintendent Chair, is the interest of having the lower grades, the primary grades at Bramble, and then the upper grades. There's some resistance to having the 7th and 8th graders, but that happens all the time. I totally understand that. But that's what people have been talking about, and that's what the community input has been interestingly about.
Number 4, communication to families. I think that was around Bramble. I'm not sure.
So I would definitely need some clarification there. I mean, I know there was definitely community feedback, and it was an ask that there be more and more early communication around the meetings and things. And I know there have been efforts and endeavors definitely to try and share that more liberally through social media and notifications at the schools and to the families. But I'm not sure if there was a different directive there or an action item outside of that.
Are we speak? I know we've talked about it throughout the duration of this planning, and I know our chair has been very forceful in making sure that engagement is included. I do think, but I also recall that we said once. Well, let me speak it from this way. Once we lay out somewhat of a plan, we have to figure out what direction we're going. And it's at that point that I think administration needs to be involved or facilitate whatever level of engagement is needed at that time. I'm just putting it out there. Is that what our understanding was?
I think the original concern was from families from Silverton.
Yes.
I know we heard this from Bramble, and community members, that the communication was not as robust as they needed it to be from those particular areas. And so it was kind of, can that be increased? And what's the plan to do that? That's kind of how but I don't think it was us to do it. It was just an action item from the community.
Right.
And they wanted to know.
But it was more specific to what was going on that with those schools. Mm-hmm. And so
I took it to be specific because they were asking, but I think that the general statement was, as a district, we need to do more communication.
Exactly.
That's how I took it. Again, clarify, but. Yeah, I think I didn't take it. I thought they were just kind of being the mouthpiece, but it was representative of a unified thought. But I'm happy to be wrong. Yes, ma'am.
I came a few times to meetings that were rescheduled or just, something happened and like physically walked here and there was no meeting 3 separate times. So just, I don't know.
From ad hoc?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And I've asked a few people if I could be added to like an email notification list or something, and I was told no.
No?
I'm not exactly sure who told me that, but I'm sorry that happened.
And I do think, we're talking about Kyle Reiser and Ozzie Davis, there's been a few people on and off that we probably do need to look at the list that we're using to help staff figure out who they might be, because it also can't be so big that it gets crazy or somebody's a one-off kind of attendance. So yeah, we should help staff with that.
For sure. 5, Gamble Montessori Elementary historical context. So I think that the superintendent wanted to understand what the expectations were from the board regarding Gamble Montessori, to get some historical context on 5, 6, and 7, so that she could make some informed decisions around the lottery.
Proposals.
Yes, or
Not
informed
decisions.
proposals around the lottery, the process for Montessori's, etc. So I'm going to defer to the historians up here around what were the plans. We talked about it a little bit. What were the plans for Gamble Montessori? And
go ahead, Ms. Bolden.
I'll start
okay,
and fill it in, Carolyn, because you were very much a part of that whole mercy thing.
I was part of the mercy thing. Right?
Yeah, you were.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy. We lived through that, didn't we? Well, what was originally an innovative and exciting thing called public school Montessori's, which we helped make sure happened 20, 30 years ago or however long. What has happened is that we have found out that our Montessori's are our most diverse and representative student body populations, meaning you have the greater mix both by class, by race, by whatever. So, and we also had great growth in Montessori. Some of the big growth we've had has been in preschool, Montessori, and our international students, be they refugees or immigrants or whatever. So that's where the growth has. And what we found out is that we needed to make true when people saw the district only as east and west. We had to find a way to have a reputable Montessori high school on the west side. And during Mrs. Ronan's time, she became, as a Price Hill girl of Irish parents, became very well aware that Mercy was going to be up for sale. So that was then the big thing. And the board had to decide, because it was really the Superintendent Mitchell, who made the determination that Gamble High School would become Montessori rather than the new Walnut on the west, or of the west.
And I would add that that whole concept, we went through a really robust community engagement. It was the perfect, I should say it like that.
It was.
It was probably one of the best community engagement processes that I've experienced since I've been here. And what Ms. Bolton hit on about the whole Montessori concept came about as a result of that engagement, but it also involved other things, which is included on here. You know, the elementary school plus the Dater High School testing, which was also part of the conversation at that time. Okay. And so I'm saying all that to say, I mean, you know, things come full circle because we're still talking about these things, but I kind of lost my train of thought, but the whole concept in that transition, there were lots of topics, lots of things talked about. It was believed and accepted and passed that we needed Montessori on that side. Thus, the decision was made for Mercy to become focused in Montessori, and then the elementary school would be the elementary Montessori. So there would be sort of a natural transition there. But the question that was still outstanding was around the Dater High School testing requirements, because Dater's on that side as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as Dater was first invented, long before we were on, Dater was supposed to be the Walnut of the West.
Yes.
It did not happen.
Yes.
The vast majority, many years ago, 10 years ago, or maybe it's still true now, one of the largest contingencies of students at Dater became the kids that had to leave Walnut.
Yes, they would, and it was a problem.
It was a big problem.
It was a problem because it wasn't, well.
They're gone now, so why?
Yeah. Well, it was almost like kids were identified as, well, they can't make it here, so we're just going to push them over there. It was
awful.
It was awful, right? And we had to niche that.
Kids from the west side, I had a gentleman who is now, he's easily 100 years old. and he's since passed, God love him. But he would talk about taking in this time, he's the one that communicated to me while he was in his 90s. He said, we are still going to get on the streetcar and go to Walnut, meaning the West Siders. He was a born and raised Westwooder. We're going to get on the streetcar, Eve. And because I did, and I don't care how long it took, and that guy wanted Walnut. So it's sort of an absurd kind of thing to think that you can have an SCPA or a Walnut in every one of the quarters. So there has to be some things that are citywide, just because you can't even gather that, you can't build the reputation or whatever. But Dater has been, unfortunately, I think, poorly served from kind of its start in how we've done it. And again, the superintendent has some good, I think, an interesting idea about Dater, maintaining it, of course, but maybe in some place else where we actually have some property, if we ever get enough opportunity to find that kind of money, because that's the Heinold property.
So if there's a question about the Dater High School testing, are we saying that we're not suggesting that be the Walnut Hills of the West?
It won't be, it can't be,
so
but
no
maybe
testing.
if there is something, and what started with Mitchell is the IB program.
Okay.
So that
So
maybe
they're-
Data becomes the IB program rather than, you know, and that was introduced by the Community Learning Center people, if I recall, where they said there's very few places in the country that have a K-12 IB, International Baccalaureate. And when Laura left, she was anticipating, Ms. Mitchell was anticipating having IB on the east side, focusing, remember, on, it would be Withrow and one of the, or both of the international schools.
Yeah.
So they were developing it on the west side. So I think Data is IB.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah,
mean, I
do.
think that's sort of where that landed. I don't know if that's still true, but I know they've been doing PD for it.
Yeah.
There's been cohorts there as an advanced. So it'd be more like if they did Withrow again as an IB program, then Data would be more matched to Withrow.
So I do know that there are some questions. I've got some questions via text. There are some hands raised online.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Just before we move past the game of Montessori, I did have a specific question if I could around. Is there any record of specific commitments that the district made with the stand-up of Gamble Montessori High School?
Not like the Clark thing. No.
Yeah, I think that's
to
what
my
we're
knowledge,
looking at.
no.
Okay.
There is that agreement through Clark, which we are we are not living by right now because there's more kids than was promised.
Yeah.
But to my knowledge, there was no community. I mean, the Westwood community was so good about this. They were remarkable. That's another
Say
great
that again.
engagement.
I missed the point.
Remember that, how we were really concerned, and initially the Westwood people, "Oh, we're not too sure we want to lose Mercy. We're not too sure that we want to have a CPS high school in our backyard," because it's in the heart of Westwood.
Right, it is.
Let's just be real.
And there were some early problems.
And somehow our folks, I'll probably point to about 10 people on the west side that made it happen, and neighborhood people. But to my knowledge, Westwood Works or whatever, it would probably still work with all those different community groups. We did not have to have an agreement with them, to my knowledge.
But the engagement
Was fantastic.
Awesome.
Awesome.
That was true
Yes.
engagement. We need to go back to that model and look at how I heard radio ads. Everybody was invited to attend. I don't even live on that side, and I was
Radio,
excited.
TV.
I was excited and felt included to participate.
They were great sessions.
It was.
Carolyn made a bunch. I made a bunch.
They need to.
Pam Bowers was one of the leading community people that was insistent.
I think
It was
that's the
super.
communication piece that was, and when you've had that
It's a
type
model.
of engagement and then you don't, and it's completely opposite, that is definitely powerful. I do know that I'm getting several texts that there are some questions online.
Good.
What I'm going to ask is that you ask your question, and then we're going to just go around once to everybody, and then, so we can get the questions asked in 16 minutes. So I do know there are a few online. Hands raised, Rob? Okay.
Tracy.
Tracy?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
It's Tracy. How are you, everyone?
Hi, how are you?
Great. It's Tracy Linville from JPP. I would just like to object to the fact that it was said that community input has been that the community would like K-3 at Bramble and 4-6 or 4-8 at John P. Parker. I would like to ask what community, which aspect or demographic of that community has said that, because I've been to every meeting except for one, and the parents of John P. Parker, the students that we're talking about, the Madisonville students, have not been engaged because one reason is they first did not realize that Bramble had anything to do with John P. Parker. They were not aware that the option was on the table to split John P. Parker, and their students, half would be going to Bramble and half would be going to John P. Parker, or in a sense, their younger students would be going to John P. Bramble, and the older would be going to John P. Parker. Also, we have asked multiple times that a meeting be hosted at John P. Parker to make it accessible to our parents. And they still have not held a meeting at John P. Parker. So we're hearing from a portion of the community, but we're not hearing from the portion of the community that really is affected by whatever will happen in Madisonville. Our parents overall have stated, yes, they would love a middle school, but they don't want to split their younger students with their older students. They count on all of their family of students being in one building. It is different when they go to middle school because they're used to going to high school for middle school. So they're okay, you know, understanding that, yeah, eventually some of my kids will not be in the same building. But overall, the parents that we've engaged at school through conference nights and our STEM night have said, hey, I didn't even know what was going on. So I just ask that before any decision is made about JPP, Bramble, Schroeder, that we have a meeting. And please, I would love the ad hoc members to come to that meeting so that our parents can engage and they can express their needs, because it is a racial issue, an equity issue. We're hearing from a certain demographic. In fact, last meeting, someone mentioned that a certain demographic did not feel welcome at our school, and that's just not simply the case. We have 70% of our students African American. The other 30% of our students are multiracial, white, and Hispanic. We do have a few Asian students of Asian descent and a few students from Arabic descent. But 70% of our students are African American. So 30% of the students do feel comfortable. So what population is not feeling welcome, or what is that? The more affluent of that demographic? Is that the
So Tracy,
so that we're a 4-star school. So
Tracy,
I mean,
Tracy,
we need
Tracy, Tracy.
I know.
I'm
You
good.
know how
No. I listen. I got you, and I think I want to thank you for your question. I do want to provide some space for the answer to your question, or at least some of it. That's fine. So, well, do any of my colleagues want to?
Oh, sure.
You can go.
I'm the one that's on the ballot. I want to be the one to answer this.
So I think that you bring up the overarching theme of what I've heard you say is that you would like more engagement and more effective communication. And that goes to number 4 on our list, that we have asked the administration to engage with all of our schools more, but specifically Bramble, JPP, Schroeder, Silverton, because you all have brought this to our attention that that's a desire. So we're going to leave that message for Jeremy to relay to the superintendent and her team, which he's on the team, that you all have requested more engagement. You all have requested meetings. I am particularly interested in maybe a survey of the families at John P. Parker to find out what it is that you all are desiring. What is it that you understand? But I do want to be very, very honest with you. We spent a lot of money on Bramble, and the plan was to have, and I don't remember Jeremy saying that there was a survey done of the community. I thought that was just kind of, we're just throwing out ideas here, and the possibility of 4 through 8, 9 through 12 for Schroeder, but the intention for Bramble was to be pre-K through 3. Is that right?
That's correct. And there was a survey offered between the two community sessions that were held, I believe, at Bramble.
Okay.
And so just as a quick recap, there were 237 responses to the survey between those two sessions.
Okay.
And I believe the feedback that was being referred to, out of those 237, there were 87 respondents. So the largest portion of that, or the ones who indicated the pre-K through 3rd division for Bramble, the 4 through 8 JP Parker, and the 9 through 12 for Schroeder. So in fact, it was up to 130 of those indicated the 9 through 12 for Schroeder. So that survey did did go out. There were, the number of responses, and that's where that feedback came from.
Was that
But-
specifically the, hold on, Tracy, hold on. I'm gonna stop you right there because we're not gonna get into the back and forth, but
No, I just wanted to say that if there's also information about who filled out the survey, and if you look at who filled out the survey, the least number of respondents were parents of students of John P. Parker.
so that was gonna be my question, is were those respondents specifically from John P. Parker, or were they neighborhood parents, families, teachers?
They were across the broad spectrum. Some of the larger perspectives were those who reside or live in Madisonville, children with currently attending CPS, children currently attending JPP, children currently attending Schroeder. They said it was across a pretty broad spectrum. I mean, and there were higher and lower amount of responses for each of those categories, of course.
So would it be too
I've seen that
time
data.
consuming?
There's like 20 to 40 responses from parents of JPP.
Okay.
I've seen the data.
Well, we're gonna, would it be too crazy to have a survey sent to John P. families to ask them what they're thinking?
I can certainly bring it to the
Sure.
superintendent of
Sure.
administration and
So Tracy,
see what the plan would call for.
we're making that request, and so the superintendent will respond back to that, but we're making that request now. Board Member Jones.
I gotta figure out how to say this. I respect everybody's thoughts and opinions about this, and I certainly understand where Tracy's coming from with the engagement. I think what has to be said is this is right now, we're still in the planning stages of all this. And I do feel like engagement is important. I go back to comments that I made before where we have to get, it's important, when we do engagement, it's gonna have to be around the plan, the recommendations that we're making as a whole. It cannot be defined or spelled out in terms of what schools specifically want at that time. The engagement process has to include the entire CPS community. And so I want to be cautious about that because I hear, and JPP has been at the table since day one, and Bramble and all the schools, because they've heard of what we're doing in ad hoc. I just ask that people be patient and let us pull the recommendations together because we haven't acted on anything yet. But this particular scenario came up because Bramble was right on the horizon and it was new, and we started talking about Bramble and Schroeder and JPP in the beginning, and that was kind of the lead into the bigger picture. Am I making sense? Yes. So I just want to say, I hear Tracy. I think we should give the information to the superintendent, and she can figure out how to respond to that. But I just want us to understand as a community that this is, again, about the whole district and not specific pockets of the district. I just felt like I needed to say that.
I think that's wise. I would also say that, if you look at the west side of the district, the western corridor, you have overcapacity. And on the east side of the district, we have undercapacity at a significant number of our buildings. And in the Madisonville neighborhood itself, we have studied this for almost a decade, where you had disproportionate number of families deciding to go to Sands Montessori, to leave the neighborhood boundaries of JP Parker, and for whatever reasons, and we don't need to rehash that, but we've been trying to deal with a reality of under and over capacity, and also equitable access for everybody.
Exactly.
So we only have 4 minutes, and I'm just gonna say I do agree with some of what has been said by my colleagues, but I also think that it minimizes people when you tell them that they're asking for more engagement and participation. And to me, it's minimizing to say, well, hey, just keep it high level. I think that people are asking for engagement at every opportunity that they see to be heard, to ask for more engagement.
We don't.
I don't think
Sorry.
think that we just made the request to administration, and I think that that's fair to make the request that people's voices be at the table that are asking for that. So that we made that request. Pass that message on.
I think
Yes,
the
ma'am.
request specifically was a survey of J.P. Parker
Family specific.
families.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So that's my inquiry, because they're saying that they're not being asked questions. I think we've got enough means to be able to just ask the families of JPP the same questions that the Bramble families, or whatever, just give the survey to them. That's what I'm hearing that they want. I think that's that hard.
Well,
Anyone?
well, I'm going to be very honest. I'm hearing something different. And I don't need to discuss it, but I'm saying this is a package.
I
It
agree.
is not,
I agree.
you know, we know that there are concerns. We know the community has concerns, and we know we have to deal with that. But we cannot deal with it slice and dice. Because if we do the survey, when you do the survey, there's an expectation that you do something with it. And we may not be able to promise people what they're asking for. So I'd much rather say, or not give the impression that people are going to, quote, get what they want, but rather get what's in the best interest of the district. And we're not there yet. So I do appreciate and respect.
I understand,
Yeah.
but what it sounds to me, I heard a multitude of things in what what Tracy shared.
Mm-hmm.
But I would rather listen to you and share that I can't do that than not listen to you at all. That's my perception. So does anyone else have anything under other business? Board Member Moulton?
Do we get to the Clark Montessori?
Oh, I'm
High
sorry.
School?
Did we skip
yeah.
that?
Because that actually has some immediate.
Yes, let's talk about the Clark Montessori.
And I would just
High
add to
school
what Carolyn said, there's not going to be a plebiscite at every school.
Right.
That's what we have to avoid. There should be engagement at every school
There
and
sure
every
should be.
community, meaningful
Yes.
engagement. So I'm buying that, but people shouldn't get into the mood. I mean, I've lived through the facilities master plan, which was a masterful engagement effort, but you didn't have plebiscites at every school.
And that's not what I'm suggesting
Exactly.
at all. But
I
engagement should happen, and I think we can all agree that engagement should be increased. People are coming saying that they need that. Yes, ma'am. Clark Montessori High School options.
There was an agreement made with the community of limiting the number of students at Clark Montessori. And over a number of years, we tried to find a way to have a reputable Montessori high school on the west side so that you would have two divisions based upon which feeder Montessori schools, elementary schools, you went to determine whether or not you went to the east side or the west side Montessori high school. That's my understanding. That was not enforced, frankly, forcefully, I believed, until Superintendent Wright came. It was massaged, it was wink and blink, it was sibling this, sibling that, and for good reason, I understand, avoided. But so the problem now is that the limit at Clark, which we've now overstated or whatever, that limit is too small in all likelihood for dividing the Montessoris by two, east and west. So the limit at Clark Montessori it does need to, we have to address it, and maybe there's another negotiations or what have you to make it somewhat larger. But the big plan is that to make it possible for there to be such limits at Gamble or at Clark is a third Montessori high school.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen in a year or two.
I agree.
Period. So that's the long term.
That's as big picture as it gets.
That's it.
Yeah.
Sure, sure.
So that's where we are. We shouldn't have negotiated that, but we did. And it had to happen because it was a very adamant community about even having a CPS high school in Hyde Park.
And I have a question about the lottery process. This is more around policy stuff. So if a student is admitted to the Montessori high school, do they have to have the Montessori background? So are they, because I know there are students that got admitted to the Montessori to Clark and never been in Montessori
Right.
before. So
Yeah.
to me, that's a policy issue, but a policy and implementation.
It is a policy, you're right, and there have been abuses of that policy
Right.
based
Okay.
upon
That's-
families and based upon particular circumstances. And there have been people that are now our family, extended family. They went to, let's see, Parker Woods Montessori, wanted to go to Clark, and properly were told by a board member, me, no, you're going to be going to Gamble. And so that's a feeder program, East Side and West Side. But yes, that's been abused, and it continues to be abused under special circumstances. But the answer is a third high school
Well,
in 2
that's
years.
a problem.
It's awful.
It's a problem.
Well, and we know
Okay.
we know that happens.
Okay.
We
Yes,
all know
we
that
do.
happens. I've got one, Ms. Deborah, I'm gonna let you ask your question and then you have to get off because we're a little over, but you want your question to be recorded. So ask your question, Ms. Elkins Brown, and then we can see if we get an answer. Is she able to ask her question? Okay, Ms. Elkins Brown, you got 2 minutes to ask your question, really like 30 seconds. But
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My first question is, when they acquired Bramble, did they go in and have an inspection for lead and asbestos? My second question is, why are they hiring an assistant principal at this time for Bramble when you have less than 50 kids? I thought everyone was trying to save money. My third thing was over in Avondale. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but at one time they did have a junior high. So if you have a building that can accommodate 650 and you can free up another building for 650, that would be a great cost savings.
yes, ma'am. Great minds think alike. We're all thinking the same things. I'm sorry you had a tough time getting in, Miss Elkins Brown. Let me see if we can get some answers for you.
But and the reason with the lead base, I know people will paint over things, but it would not be in the best interest to put children and families at risk. And I did work in that building at one time. So that's a personal concern.
So
The answer. $10 in that building, besides buying it. And the inspections have to occur in order to have a certificate of occupancy. And my understanding is that the certificate of occupancy has been granted or is in the process or whatever, Jeremy.
That is correct.
So.
It has been issued. We've got it.
Yeah, so it's been issued by the city, but I do think we can ask the administration, Madam Chair, to just verify that we're cool.
yes, ma'am.
And about both the lead concern and the asbestos concern.
So those are action items, Miss Phyllis, for and Jeremy, you've got that too. So we'll get confirmation about that. Hiring a principal with less than 50 students. Any insight?
That was hired, my understanding, but part of that is because the principal for the building is one of our preschool principals that shares several buildings, and a number of hundreds of students. So that might be somebody that maybe has to be on site rather than necessarily, Jeremy, help me out.
That wasn't my question. That wasn't my question. It was about.
I'm sorry.
They have a job opening that's posted for an assistant principal. And I'm just wondering, why would you hire an assistant principal, whether it's full-time or part-time, right now?
So, Ms. Deborah, I'm gonna tell you honestly, we gotta get a little bit more information about that because we have to get more information about that because I don't know the answer to your question, but we can put that on our action list and we can get some more clarification for that too.
Thank you.
You are so welcome. And then your comment about the 650 and the 650 with the buildings, we are thinking alike. So definitely we will, at least we know that we got your okay on that one out of the 3 questions.
And Corinne, with that, when they had the junior high in Avondale, it serviced some of the kids from Woodward and other schools went there. And once they went to high school, then they went to Schroeder and Woodward and Hughes.
Well, you know, you've gone back some decades there, Ms. Elkins. But I do appreciate the historical context. I'm gonna add you to the historian list up here with my other 2 colleagues because you
and that was before, and I know this before your colleagues, some of them.
But you trying to tell your
not
age?
Before me, because I lived in the neighborhood, so I knew where that junior high was. So
okay,
yes.
But we do have to go though, Ms. Elkins Brown. Are you good now? Because I don't want you to spank me because you had that mama. Okay. So does anyone else have any other questions
We're not going to have a junior high in this district.
Yeah, junior highs are not what we're talking about. We're talking about middle schools. And to be honest with you, there's been some discussion about what the number is. Is it
Exactly.
6, 7, 8, or is it 7, 8? Was it 7, 8, 9, or 5, 6?
5, 6, 7, 8.
5, 6, 7, 8. And what we have now learned is that it could very well look different across corridors because it has to. I think the biggest takeaway that I want everyone to really understand, and I think my colleagues know, but I'll say it. I do believe we have to reimagine education, but we don't always have to do the same thing the same way at every one of our schools. I'm a proponent of what we do on one side, one quarter, let's do on the other quarters, because I want it to ultimately not be looking like we're attacking one area. But maybe we are going to do something. It just doesn't have to look the same. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This evening, whatever it is. Yes, ma'am.
I was
gonna say, do you have an unanswered question about Clark?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know we're done.
Well, like 10 seconds. What's your question?
Oh, just, the enrollment process right now, any kid can get into Clark and we're just overextended in every capacity.
Yes.
So really, what are the steps to change this
Come to
moving
the
forward?
policy committee meeting and say that you don't know that it is. Just know that that is an issue.
I think it's an issue of capacity, not necessarily. Is it an issue of capacity rather than the violation of the policy?
Well, for the building is not enough. We have overextended by, I want to say, 70 kids, which is a whole other community that we don't have a community for. So each classroom has an additional 15 kids that just, it's not set up for. It's not Montessori curriculum. You just,
it could be both issues.
It's both.
But I agree with Ms. Bolton that that's a policy and implementation concern.
And that's where it starts.
Yeah.
For if you want the board members to do anything, we control over policy. So start there. And board member Bolton, you'll see her again because she sits on policy. So I think we're done for the day, for the month. We will reconvene our meeting again at the end of October. I don't know the date.
Oh, I have a question.
What was it? October 26th.
I have a question about the report.
Yes, ma'am.
So, for whatever reason, we didn't focus on the report today. So refresh for me, help me understand, when did we say we were going to get a report to the full board? I'm asking for this reason. Has a lot of financial considerations and everything. And now that we've had the fact finding for the facilities, I think all of that has to be somehow together and reviewed. And I'm just thinking, like, time-wise, I don't know how much time we have where we can put off even with the facility stuff. So there's sort of an urgency.
So realistically, my thought was that we finished these questions that were kind of looming around from the summer, and that we begin, Phyllis and I were working already on drafting, kind of giving a skeleton to what it should look like, the corridor model, the things that we came up with consensus. I didn't even think about the facilities information, but for sure we need to probably add that. And then the information today with regard to the middle school options, we just got that today. So I was thinking the second meeting in October, but I didn't think of facilities.
Okay, well, that sounds reasonable and doable to me. If we can do that, that's just me feeling a sense of urgency that the longer we wait to even get some buy-in from the full board, the harder it's going to be when we have to do the budget pieces for this. And because we don't know what this is, we don't know how much this is going to cost. So we just also are going to need to build in time to even look at that. But yeah, but that sounds doable.
Well,
the middle of October.
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, the more information we give everyone, it will turn into a legit long presentation from us to the board. So I wasn't even thinking of facilities, and I was thinking we're already at an hour because we need to finalize the written and then come up with a presentation that is going to include Jeremy and other departments as well. So for sure.
Convene the full board, probably for at least
on a separate day. Is
this? Yeah.
I think so too.
We quickly pass whatever the treasurer's report is and the recommendations from the superintendent.
I think
we don't do any other presentations, and very frankly, this committee and the report and the administrative folks present 3 hours, so that's just sharing everything that we know in our justifications.
And that's not untypical for ad hoc committee to do.
Oh, okay.
That's exactly right.
The way we used to
then
do
that's
things.
good, because I was trying to fit it into a board meeting, and I was like, I don't know how we're going to do all this. So if it's a regular meeting that we convene on our own, that'll be good. So that would probably be what, October or November? End of October?
We have to probably do something in October for sure, because the budget process starts in about 2 weeks.
Right.
I do know that the administration was working with Jen and originally had hoped to try and incorporate some of the information for like the committee of the whole that was coming up. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's too soon. I think, but
I was like, okay, so Miss Phyllis, you and I will get together next week, and I just was planning on being up here for couple hours, but I'm saying it's going to be lunch. I'll buy lunch and we'll just sit around and work it out. Then we'll send it to the other committee members for fill-in. So that's just how you all know. So we're going to kind of come up with this, with the skeleton, send it to you all for
you got
fill-in.
this detail and this big picture.
Oh my gosh. So,
you're responsible for finding the balance.
You guys create it.
And
we'll participate.
So I tell you, just pray for me, because dealing with these two is crazy enough. No, it'll be open to the. It will be open to the public because it has to be. And comment. So our next regularly scheduled meeting is October 26th, 4 o'clock. If there is another meeting Miss Phyllis will send it out to everybody. So please make sure that you email her to get on her list. And she's been working from one list. She's been really, really trying, but we will get out information to everyone if something has to change or be added, not changed. It's not going to be changed. Yes, so we're going to adjourn at the moment. It is 5:46. Thank you so much for coming and have a great evening.